On this video, we are going to analyze question 1 from the February 2008 California bar exam, which is a torts question. Now, when the question is short, I will read the question to make the video more self-contained. If the facts of the question are very lengthy, then all the questions are posted also along with the analysis, so you'll have to read the question separately. Question 1 reads as follows. Peter, a 12-year-old, was playing with his pet pigeon in a field near his home, which is adjacent to a high-voltage electric power substation. The substation is surrounded by a 6-foot-tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Attached to the fence are 12 10 by 14-inch warning signs which read, quote, "Danger, high voltage," close quote. New paragraph. Peter's pigeon flew into the substation and landed on a piece of equipment. In an attempt to retrieve his pet, Peter climbed the surrounding fence, then scaled a steel support to a height of approximately 10 feet from where the bird was stranded. When Peter grasped the bird, it fluttered from his hand, struck Peter in the face, causing Peter to come into contact with high-voltage wire, which caused him severe burns. New paragraph. Peter's father is contemplating filing a lawsuit on Peter's behalf against the owners and operators of the substation, who are called Power and Light Company, PLC, to recover damages arising from the accident. What causes of action might Peter's father reasonably assert against PLC? What defenses can PLC reasonably raise? And what is the likely outcome on each? The analysis then asks us, what causes of action might Peter's father bring? And so what you would do under bar conditions is you would think about what is it that electric did, or Power and Light Company, what did they do that might constitute a cause of action? You'd say, well, first of all, maybe they acted negligently in maintaining the power station there, exposing people to the risk of electrocution. Maybe they were negligent. That's your first cause of action. Secondly, you might claim that the activity of maintaining a high voltage substation is a strict liability activity. And so you would make that claim. Thirdly, you might claim that since electric was maintaining this dangerous substation there near the area where children play, that perhaps this is so dangerous that strict liability applies. Maybe PLC is engaged in an ultra-hazardous activity. We don't know that that's true, but you could make that argument. And so that's another cause of action you might bring on Peter's behalf, or the father might bring, strict liability. And finally, a possible cause of action for battery, that's stretching things quite a bit. Battery requires the intentional, touching of another, harmful or offensive touching. And the intent, as we know, can be replaced by substantial certainty that the injury or the harm will occur. And so you could make an argument that what PLC is doing exposes children to such a high risk of harm that it's substantially certain that some child is going to hit a ball over there and go after it and get injured. Now, I don't think that's a very strong argument, and I would not devote very much of my time on the bar exam and dealing with that, but I'd put a paragraph in there. I think the answer is you don't have the substantial certainty. So they ask us, for each of these causes of action that Peter's father might bring, what defenses what does Peter have to prove, and what defenses will PLC raise? Well, looking over here, we see if Peter's father is suing PLC for negligence, Peter's father will have to prove duty, breach, causation, damages, and no effective defenses. Duty. Negligence is defined as the breach of duty of due care owed to the plaintiff. And so we need to show that PLC owed Peter a duty of due care and breached that duty. So looking at duty, did PLC owe Peter a duty of due care? Well, everyone owes everybody else a duty of due care in their everyday activities if that person is a foreseeable plaintiff. Duty of due care is owed to whom? Foreseeable plaintiffs. Well, who are the foreseeable plaintiffs in this problem? Well, unknown trespassers are not foreseeable plaintiffs. You don't owe them anything. Known trespassers, TP for trespasser, known trespassers are owed a duty of due care, and child trespassers. If these are this is a situation where children play in the area and the landowner has good reason to expect children will be playing there, then these children become foreseeable plaintiffs and they are owed a duty of due care. But the difference between owing the child the duty of due care and owing an adult known trespasser a duty of due care is up here. The duty of due care is to make efforts to make the property safe for adults, whereas down here you need to make it reasonably safe for children, and it's a different set of requirements. So PLC owes Peter a duty of due care if Peter is a child trespasser. That is, if the child trespasser doctrine applies. Well, the child trespasser doctrine, of course, is the key to what this problem is all about. The basic concept is that if you know that children are playing, if you're the landowner and you know that children play in the area, and you know that the danger that is on your land, not natural dangers, but artificial dangers on your land, are dangers that these children might not recognize, and therefore might get injured by this danger that you know about. So you know about the danger, you know that children play there, society imposes a duty on that landowner to exercise due care to those children. And that's the so-called child trespasser doctrine. Now, this child trespasser doctrine has other names. It's sometimes called the attractive nuisance doctrine. Now, the problem with calling an attractive nuisance doctrine is that you may be led to believe that the child had to be attracted to come onto the land because of the artificial condition there. But that is not the law. That was the law a long time ago. But that is not the law, and the child does not need to be attracted to come onto the land because of the activity there. Indeed, in our case, Peter was not attracted to go onto the Power and Light Company substation because of any attractive activity there. He was chasing his pigeon. Now, so this doctrine, the attractive nuisance doctrine, applies if you have a situation where the children are so young that they don't understand the nature of the danger, and the owner of the land does understand the nature of the danger, knows that children trespass in that area, and may not understand the danger. In that case, society says that landowner has got to look out for the children. And so the question then becomes, in our case where Peter is 12 years old, is Peter so young that Peter does not understand the nature of the danger? Peter can read, and the signs say danger, high voltage, but on the other hand, children are pretty spontaneous. They might ignore those signs. And so there's a serious question as to whether or not the child trespasser doctrine would apply to a child who is 12 years old. Starting at about age 14, it is very difficult to find cases of child trespasser where the child trespasser doctrine has been applied to children 14 years old and older. 12 might work, might not. So you needed to discuss whether or not the child trespasser doctrine applied and say what the doctrine is. If the child trespasser doctrine applies, then the owner owes a duty to exercise due care. It owes a duty to people like Peter to exercise due care. And the due care has to be due care to protect children from the danger at the substation, not adults. So the question is then, the breach part, the question is, did PLC, the Power and Light Company, did Power and Light Company do enough so they did not breach the duty of due care owed to children like Peter? Well, how do you establish breach of duty of due care? There are 4 ways, only one of which is applicable in our case. Neither of these this apply, but the balancing test might very well apply. In the balancing test, we're going to use that to try to decide whether or not what electric did was enough, or did they breach their duty of due care by not doing more. Now the balancing test is shown here, weighs the risk created by the defendant's conduct against the justification for the risk. If the risk outweighs the justification, that's an unreasonable risk, that's negligence. If the justification outweighs the risk, then the risk was justified, and that's not negligent. This risk justification is also referred to sometimes as the learned hand test. It's also called a Carroll-Towing test, also called a balancing test. Any of that will do. The risk is measured in this test by the likelihood of injury from the defendant's conduct multiplied, not added, multiplied by the gravity of the harm if harm should occur. Whereas the justification for the risk is measured by adding, not multiplying, the burden of prevention and the social utility of the defendant's conduct. Let's look at these one by one. Our question is, was the risk created by electric justified so that there was not negligence? Now, the risk created by Power and Light Company, the risk created by them was the risk of operating the substation with a 6-foot fence around it, with barbed wire on top of the fence, and with signs, 12 signs on the fences. That's a situation they created. And the question is, did they do enough, or were they still negligent? And so we have to, for that, we look to the balancing test. The likelihood of injury resulting from the way the substation is being operated right now. And you point out here, use lots of facts, that Peter is 12 years old, the likelihood that a 12-year-old would ignore the signs and jump the fence anyway, say whatever you want to say about that. Point out that the fence is 6 feet tall, and that will deter some people. On the other hand, a 12-year-old will jump a 6-foot fence like it's not even there almost. There's barbed wire on the top. Well, that's not very challenging for a 12-year-old. And there are 12 signs around the building. And so use these facts and come up with whatever you want to say about the likelihood of injury. What's important to get maximum points when you use these facts is you take 2 sides. The child is 12 years old and therefore should have been able to appreciate the danger, particularly with the signs and the barbed wire there. On the other hand, the other side of this, 12-year-olds are very precocious. 12-year-old boys jump fences like they're not there. They do it all the time. And so the fact that the fence is 6 feet high and has barbed wire at the top really isn't very challenging. And so say something about here the fence was 6 feet high, but again, that's that would deter some people, but not that much for a 12-year-old. 12-year-old is almost 6 feet tall himself or herself. And point out the barbed wire and the 12 signs. So say what you want to say about the likelihood of injury using the facts you're given. The gravity of injury, if it should occur, is great bodily harm or death. And so what you have here is some level of likelihood. I don't think it's a high likelihood. I don't think it's a low likelihood. I think it's medium. Medium likelihood of great bodily harm or death is on the risk side. What about the justification side? Well, the burden of prevention, how could the power and light company prevent this? They could build a higher fence, and they can put more barbed wire, make it harder to scale and get over the fence. And they can do that, and it's not all that costly to do that. This is a power and light company. They can build a fence. That's not that hard for them to do. So you make the argument that the burden, here's what you'd have to do to prevent it, and say what you want to about the level of burden. I don't think it's a very high burden. And finally, you combine that with the social utility of the defendant's conduct. Now, here, be careful, because we're not talking about the social utility of providing electricity to the free world or something. We're talking about the social utility of exactly the conduct that the person is being sued over. And so if you are practicing medicine